Welcome back to part 2, Overdrive sounds. Pay close attention to the amount of clarity in each clip, as well as how the overdrive characteristic of the amp changes with each sound. Listen closely for how much treble, middle and bass there is in each clip as well. If you want to know more about what equipment I'm using, why I'm using 3 guitars, refer back to part 1 of the series, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Today's amp is the Blue Guitar Amp 1 Mercury Edition on the Vintage channel, and this is based on Thomas Blug's extensive collection of old Marshall amps. We're running that through a 4x12 of 25 watt greenbacks, mic'd with an Electro Voice RE20, which is an extended range dynamic mic, and a Royer R121. See you on the other side. It's about a week later. I've edited the video down, I've listened to the audio back, and I've kind of broken down my observations into three categories: clarity, EQ, and kind of overall tonal characteristics. In terms of clarity, the Jazzmaster has so much clarity and twang in the sound compared to the P90. When swapping from the P90 clip to the Jazzmaster clip, it sounds like you're taking the blanket off the speaker, that kind of thing you hear people say on forums a lot. It just adds so much more high end into the sound. You get so much more clarity, especially with those kind of burly chords where you've got a lot of low notes grouped together. You really get so much more clarity with the Jazzmaster than the P90. I actually often don't like P90s because they can often be quite woolly, they can be quite thick in the low end, in a way that makes them quite woofy and quite dark, and they often don't have a lot of clarity and punch to them. But I actually really like this one because it is set low in the body, so you're getting less low end, and the focus is more on the upper mids rather than the kind of the middle mids or the lower mids. So it has a lot more clarity than I would expect from a normal P90, which is why I really like it and get on with that guitar. In terms of EQ, I've alluded to this already. The P90 is a lot more mid-focused and the highs are a lot more rolled off compared to the Jazzmaster. And that mid-range emphasis almost makes it sound a bit honky, a bit nasal in some places. But that being said, it creates a really nice natural overdrive with the amp, and it's going to sit really nicely in a band mix because the highs are rolled off, there's not too much low end, it just sits really nicely in that guitar frequency and pushes the amp into a really nice natural kind of tube overdrive. The Jazzmaster's obviously got a lot less mid than the P90 and a lot more treble, and the open chords sound quite harsh actually, I think, with the Jazzmaster. It doesn't shine in that kind of sound. And whereas with the P90, the kind of mid-range is what kind of saturates and overdrives. With the Jazzmaster, it's almost that the high end is saturating and you're getting that overdrive, the prominent EQ and the overdrives in the high end, and you really get that kind of saturated sound in the higher frequencies rather than in the mid frequencies. And again, in a band mix, the focus on the high end might clash with the cymbals a bit and get lost there, and it's not going to be as forward, it's not going to be as present in a mix because you've got less of that kind of key mid-range frequency pushing it to the front. So to kind of characterise them overall, the Jazzmaster's obviously got a lot more high end and less mid, and that high end focus, especially where it's saturating under overdrive, gives it an almost raspy characteristic in some of the clips. Its sound is kind of more gristly and more wiry than the P90. It's got loads of clarity, really good note separation and note definition, and it's obviously characteristically bright, and it's got a very immediate attack to the notes. The P90 is obviously more mid-focused, it's a bit nasal in some ways, it's got rolled off high end compared to the Jazzmaster, and its attack on the notes is kind of softer and rounder, and it kind of thwacks in a kind of quite a pleasing, slightly more gentle way than the Jazzmaster, which is so immediate and biting in its attack. Yeah, it's just overall more mid-focused, less high end, and a bit rounder in its characteristic. The problem with videos like this though is although it's really good at highlighting the differences between kind of what a P90's EQ and a Jazzmaster's EQ is like, how they overdrive the amp, etc. You're not really hearing them at their best. For this clip I had all the EQ on the amp around 5.5 I think, and it sounded good, it was a good sound, but when I use the Jazzmaster I turn the treble down, typically lower than 5, and when I use the P90 guitar I turn the treble up quite a bit more than 5. And I guess that kind of balances out the differences in the guitars a bit. But you're not hearing either guitar at its best necessarily, or how I would choose to have it. You're hearing it kind of both in a compromised way. So if you're thinking that the P90 is a bit dark for your taste and you prefer a bit more high end, well then, me too really, turn the treble up on the amp. And if you're thinking that the Jazzmaster is too bright, it's really harsh, well I agree in some of those clips too. And again, I wouldn't use the treble that high normally on the amp, I just wanted to have a neutral EQ so that you can kind of hear comparatively the differences between the two without necessarily hearing either at their best. So I hope that's been useful. In part 3 we're moving on to distortion, and we're going to use like a JCM boosted JCM 800 sound. And again, the more gain we apply, the kind of more divergent the sound becomes between the 2 or the 3 guitars. But tune in next time. I hope it's helpful. I hope going through this is interesting. Next time the riffs are going to be completely different. We're not using the same riffs again. And hopefully it's just going to give you a better idea of the differences between a Jazzmaster and a P90, and perhaps which suits you best. Or if you have a Jazzmaster and you're not quite sure about the bridge pickup and you're wondering if a Jazzmaster size P90 would be better, then again, hopefully it'll be useful for that as well. Alright, thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.